Ahead of Congress returning back to session this week, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin and Nancy Pelosi already informally agreed to a clean continuing resolution to provide funding for critical services and federal programs. But they're still at odds over specifics for stimulus checks and the budget for the next coronavirus relief package.
As a CBS correspondent just told us, Secretary of Treasury Steve Mnuchin and Nancy Pelosi have agreed on a continuing resolution which will make sure that there's funding for critical services and federal programs. What the announcer didn't say, or maybe she didn't know, and this is actually my guess, but my guess is that by passing that continuing resolution, that'll make sure that Steve and Nancy continue to get a paycheck. But what about a check for the 11 million people who are now receiving unemployment and can't make it on state unemployment benefits alone? What about a check? What about a check for the businesses who are depending on that PPP money to stay in operation? Or what about funds for the state and local government who are in dire straits and they really need your help? What about money for the schools? What about money for health care? We need to pass a stimulus bill. But I'll say this, I am less optimistic today that a stimulus bill will ever be passed. In this video, I'll give you my reasons. I'll tell you why it's doubtful that a stimulus bill will be passed this year and maybe not even next year. That's all up next right here on Over 50 TV. Welcome to Over 50 TV, where we give you the latest news on work and money for people over 50. My name is Lou Reyes. Well, before the break, I promised I would tell you why I am less optimistic that a stimulus bill will be passed. And I'm going to start with negotiations where they stand today, or I should say where they don't stand. Let's start with the White House Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Believe it or not, they are farther away from agreeing on a new stimulus package. They're farther away today than they were before Congress went on their scheduled summer recess. Before their recess, before their break, Pelosi and Democrats, they put a $2.2 or $2.5 trillion stimulus package on the table. Mnuchin and the Republicans, they countered with their own $1 trillion package. But this weekend, that all changed. The White House and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, they decided to advance what some people are calling a skinny bill. It's a new, slimmer version of the most recent Republican stimulus package. Mnuchin's skinny bill, it weighs in at a relatively modest $500 billion. And I say this almost tongue-in-cheek because that's still a lot of money. But it's certainly a far cry from the $1 trillion that Mnuchin and Republicans were demanding that the Democrats accept. The Democrats, as we know, they wanted over $2 trillion. That's what they feel is needed to stimulate the economy. So the question is, why did Republicans, after weeks of hardball negotiations with Democrats, why did they suddenly decide to slash the stimulus package in favor of the skinnier version of their bill? And did they really believe Nancy Pelosi and company will accept this much smaller amount? First, let's focus on why Mnuchin and the White House finally decided to slash their $1 trillion stimulus bill. And I say finally because they knew all along, that fiscal conservatives were screaming, they were howling about the ballooning federal deficit. Mnuchin and Trump, they knew that getting a stimulus bill, a $1 trillion stimulus bill off Senate floor was going to be tough. I think maybe they were crossing their fingers and hoping that it was going to get done. But in the end, they knew that a $1 trillion package would never make it off the Senate floor. Number two, another thing that I believe Mnuchin and Trump did is they looked at last week's unemployment numbers. They looked at the job report. They saw unemployment numbers. They were declining. They declined from over 10% down to 8%. They also saw some job growth. What they saw was more people going back to work. And when looking at those numbers, they decided that their economic plan was working and there was no need for a larger stimulus bill. And they also saw, and I think that they believed, that this new improved jobs report, that gave them political cover. It gave them a reason to present a skinny bill. So now let me answer the question, or attempt to answer the question. Do Republicans believe, do they really believe that Nancy Pelosi and company will accept this skinny bill, this $500 billion package that the Republicans have decided to present in negotiations? Well, the answer is Republicans do not believe in any way, in any shape or form, do they believe that Pelosi will accept this number. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when Pelosi first saw this proposal, because she would have, what I'm thinking is she would have hit the roof and said, what are they thinking? Well, what they're thinking is this. They're thinking is they are in the driver's seat. They don't have a need. There is no need to present a package that's any larger than $500 billion. What they're going to do, and it seems like I'm taking sides here, but it just seems to me that what they're going to do, and what I've even read and heard, is that Republicans will be able to now say that they did present a package. They presented a package that was going to address some of the more vital needs, and the Democrats shot it down. Well, the Democrats, they will shoot this down. They don't believe that $500 billion is enough to stimulate the economy. And there are many economists who agree. So what's next? Or should I say what's likely? Well, what's likely is both sides blaming each other because there's no stimulus package. What's likely is gridlock. What's likely is stalemate, more stalemate. And what's likely is there'll be no stimulus bill this year. Well, that's all I have for you folks. That's my take on negotiations. That's my take on the stimulus bill. I'm actually surprised and somewhat shocked that we've come to this. But when you're negotiating, usually you come close. Usually you try to deal. Usually what happens is you try to find common ground. That's not happening here. Well, that's all I've got for you today. As I always say, have a great day, everybody.